Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's program. This is the second of 3 discussions about the intersection of artistic expression and racial justice. Tonight, we focus on music. My name is Marcia Eli. I'm the Director of Programs at the Brooklyn Public Library's Center for Brooklyn History, and I'm a member of the Arts and Culture team BPL Presents at the library. We're really honored to be partnering in this series with New York University's Brooklyn-based 370J project and the Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music and NYU's Office of Global Inclusion, Diversity, and Strategic Innovation. For all of us at the Center for Brooklyn History, tonight is one piece of a multi-pronged initiative called Brooklyn Resists, which explores the long and powerful history of Black-led protest. There is a lot to say about Brooklyn Resists, but I'm going to let you discover that on your own. You can learn more about it in a link that will go into the chat. So in a moment, we're going to welcome singer-songwriter Jamila Woods, music journalist, producer, and chair of the Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music, Jason King, and our series moderator, Jesse McCarthy. I'm really super excited to hear all that they will be saying in the next hour. And before I turn it over to them, I just have a few very quick notes for all of you. First, know that the program can be experienced through closed captions. There is a live transcript button at the bottom of your screen. Just click on that to activate that. Second, I want to mention that we partner with a local independent Brooklyn bookstore, community bookstore. And if you're interested in exploring either Jesse's acclaimed book of essays, Who Will Pay Reparations on My Soul, or the poetry anthology Black Girl Magic, co-edited by Jamila, we're going to place a link in the chat to those pages on Community Bookstore's website. And finally, of course, I want to invite all of you to share your questions for our panelists tonight about the topic or anything else. Just type them into the Q&A box also at the bottom of your screen, and Jesse will take as many of them as there's time for towards the end of the program. So it has been a great joy and a whole lot of fun to partner with our neighbors, NYU's 370J project. And now it is my pleasure to welcome 370J's Michael Bernard. Michael.
Thank you, Marcia. Before we begin, everyone, let me start by inviting you to join me in acknowledging that while we may be gathered together virtually, we are physically joining from locations throughout the city and perhaps the country that are on unceded homeland of, in New York, the Lenape people and other Native American peoples nationwide. And we pay our respects to these communities, their members past and present, as well as all future generations. New York University, Brooklyn Public Library, and the Center for Brooklyn History acknowledge that we were founded on and beneficiaries of the intentional exclusions, genocide, and erasure of the Lenape. We are committed to working to dismantle the ongoing legacies and repercussions of settler colonialism. And this acknowledgement is only the beginning of that effort. Now on to tonight's program. Thank you for joining us again, and good evening. This is, of course, the second program in this exciting series of conversations. My name is Michael Bernard, and I'm here representing the 370J project, which is the programming arm of NYU's Brooklyn-based Center for Art and Technology and Innovation at 370J Street in downtown Brooklyn. I would like to extend my thanks again to Marcia and her team at CBH for creating space for tonight's discussion and for assembling this exceptional panel of artists and thinkers. To get things started, I'd like to introduce our distinguished moderator for tonight's discussion. Jesse McCarthy is assistant professor in the departments of English and of African and African American Studies at Harvard University. Among his published works are a new introduction for the Norton Library edition of W.E.B. Du Bois's The Souls of Black Folk, and an introduction for a new edition of Vincent O. Carter's The Burn Book. He is also the author of the collection of essays, Who Will Pay Reparations on My Soul, and a novel, The Fugitivities. Jesse, take it away.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Michael, and thank you, Marcia. And thank you to the Center for Brooklyn History for hosting this magnificent series. As has been said, this is the second installment of our three-part series. Last time I had the great good fortune to talk to two wonderful folks working in visual and artistic studies. And this evening, we're going to turn to music. Last time I talked to the Jamaican photographer, Ruddy Roy, Brooklyn-based also, shout out Brooklyn. And also Dred Scott, great I would say, faceted performance and conceptual artist. And we had a tremendous conversation. I am so excited, really blessed and honored to be joined this evening by two extraordinary talents in our time working in the field of music. But as I'm sure we'll see when we get into the conversation, I think changing and entering that world, that industry, that creative space in really extraordinary and again, multifaceted ways. And so I'll introduce both of them at present. I'm joined this evening by Jason King. Jason is the chair of the Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music, where he was the Institute's founding full-time faculty member. He is a longtime music critic and journalist for publications like Pitchfork, Slate, Vibe, The Village Voice, The Los Angeles Times, Spin, Billboard, The Root, and Vice. He's also published numerous scholarly essays, and he's the author of The Michael Jackson Treasures, which has been translated into more than 7 languages. With NPR, he serves as host and co-producer of the flagship video documentary series Noteworthy, and he's curator and host of NPR's 24/7 streaming radio channel, NPR&B, which I'm grateful to have discovered in part through this. I didn't know about that one. He's also producer and host of the 2020 NPR series Pop Talks. He's also creative director of his own entertainment company, Superlitude. And Jason has served as a music marketing and branding expert for people like Drake and Jay-Z, Katy Perry, Timbaland, Madonna, Lady Gaga, 50 Cent, Dr. Dre, and Kanye West. He is an inaugural member of the Hip Hop Council at the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, and he's currently at work on a biography of Freddie Mercury. I'm also blessed to be joined by Jamila Woods. She's a Chicago-bred singer-songwriter, educator, and award-winning poet, whose inspirations include Gwendolyn Brooks and Toni Morrison. Following the 2016 release of her debut album, Heaven, on the Chicago label Closed Sessions, Jamila received critical acclaim for her singular and genre-blending sound that is both rooted in soul and yet wholly modern. Her sophomore album, Legacy, was released via Jaguar Records in 2019. It features 12 tracks, each named after writers, thinkers, and visual artists who have influenced her life and work. As a touring artist, Jamila has shared stages with Corinne Bailey Rae, Raphael Saadiq, Common, Brittany Howard, and many, many others. She's also a Pushcart Prize-winning poet, and her work was featured in the magnificent Library of America anthology, African American Poetry, 250 Years of Struggle and Song, edited by the great Kevin Young. Jamila and Jason, it's so wonderful to have you with me this evening. Thanks so much for doing this. It's really great to see you guys.
Thanks for having us. I'm excited.
Happy to be here. Yep, happy to be here.
So, all of us, I think, have in common that obviously music is, if not at the center of what we do, influences a little bit of everything we do. Both of you in some ways more self-evidently even than myself, although I do try and have the music come into the writing in various ways. But I thought I'd love to begin by talking a little bit, about biography. And we don't have to get, you can get as personal or not as personal as you want. I never am trying to, get into anybody's business. But I do think that sometimes when people see, folks who are successful and have built certain kind of paths and careers, they wonder, how does that happen? How does somebody get there? How do you find your way? Especially young people who are interested, who are creative, who are trying to figure out how you get to be somebody who is practicing creatively and artistically, writing, doing criticism for a living. And so I wanted to ask both of you sort of how you found your way to your paths. But since I want to make it clear, it's also a conversation. It's very much a three-way. Y'all can ask me questions and we can bounce it around every which way. It's not an interview. I thought I should also begin, in all fairness, by answering the question myself. And as I was reflecting on it, the title of my essay collection is the title of a song, a poem by Gil Scott-Heron. And it's on his seminal album, Small Talk at 125th and Lenox. And that was a CD back in the day when we had those that I got, as a teenager. And when I look back on it, I feel like that was one of the things, like every year, maybe for my birthday, I would get, some new CD and it would become a bit of a fixation for me. But in truth, when I think about how I kind of got into the path of the literary and of writing, I was kind of a poetry nerd. I was somebody who really, really loved poetry. And, something about that Gil Scott album really hit, and it hit different. And it got me interested in, that kind of vein of sort of spoken word poetry, where sort of at the hinge in between, poetry and music. And I remember, I think it must have been, I want to say maybe the year after that, I got Saul Williams. I got really into Saul Williams, and I had that. I think it was, I don't know if it was his first album. It was one of his first albums, Amethyst Rockstar, and I would play those tracks over and over again. And I wanted to. I think there was a moment where I was like, I want to do that. I was terrible. I couldn't. I would try and imitate his flow, and I just really didn't have it. Which partly explains why I am not a poet, and instead I'm a professor. But nonetheless, it was a kind of it was a gateway drug, right, into literature, into the literary, into the power of the word, both spoken and written. And I really think in a lot of ways, encountering those albums and listening to them on repeat over and over was part of how I ended up getting into and getting to where I am now. So I wanted to ask, maybe I'll start with you, Jamila. What were the arts like even in your childhood or your early life? Was there ever a kind of moment where you thought, okay, this is it. I know that this is the path that I'm gonna walk?
Thank you for sharing your answer too. That was great. I really think about just the household that I grew up in. My parents were very much fans of art and also supportive of me and my siblings being creative. And they were both doctors or healers in different ways. My dad is a physician and my mom is also a physician, but does like alternative medicine. And I remember growing up being obsessed with just listening to their stories. Obviously they didn't share like confidential things, but they'd be like, there was this person and this was their kind of path to healing. Or with my mom, I did past life regressions today, and this person had this claustrophobia issue and it's because of this thing in their past life. And I was like, what? Like my mind was always blown by that. And so I think from an early age, it was like, for a while, I was like, I want to be a doctor too. I want to be that. I want to do that. And in my first kind of science class in college, I was like, oh, no, I don't want to do that. But I think really what I was attracted to in that was the storytelling and just kind of the idea that in a sense, my parents were storytellers. And I think that I too want to heal, but through music and poetry and my art. And I think that maybe being a first moment, I think it took me a long time to realize that as a formative element. But definitely when I got to high school, my high school was very academically great, but it didn't have a lot of art programs, or if they did, they weren't really accessible to me. And so I kind of stumbled into this after school program in Chicago that had all different genres of art. I wanted to be in the singing one. They had you rank your options, and the acting one was my second choice. And then there's like performance poetry. That was like my third choice. I didn't even really know what it was. But then when I got into it, it was like very transformative for me. I think in the way that you described spoken word as a gateway drug, I think that was very much the effect that it had on me, because even though I had done like choir, I had done different arts camp all of my, growing up, but it was poetry that I had this kind of innate confidence with it. Like I remember like in the poetry program, the teacher had like a group of like beginners and like advanced, and she put me in the beginner group, and I was like so upset. I was like, no, these are my poems. Like I have a DeviantArt page, like this is me. And so I think it was just the power of being able to express myself and have also this kind of like democratizing power that it had, where like no matter who it was at the open mic, you have your 3 minutes or whatever, and everyone is going to be listening to you. And I think for me, as like a kind of like introverted, didn't really fit in my high school space, poetry was very affirming of like, you're weird, that's great. Like you can come and say whatever you want to say. So I definitely think that if it wasn't for poetry, I wouldn't have had the confidence in my own voice to pursue music or film or whatever I choose to pursue in the future.
That's really beautiful. So in a way, there's a similarity, because poetry was sort of the vehicle into the world of music, with the confidence and also the importance of storytelling. I love that, and the connection to healing too. It's so beautiful. Thank you for that. Jason, what about you? I mean, how was music in your life in the early years, and how did you sort of find your way to where you are now? Or was there a moment? Was there a kind of path?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, let me just say I'm so happy to be here tonight speaking with you, Jesse and Jamila. It's always a pleasure. We are working together this year at NYU. Jamila is artist in residence, so it's just a great opportunity to chat. So, and first of all, I'm a huge fan of Jamila's music, first and foremost. And so, I'll talk about my music, but I'm certainly I want to hear more about Jamila's approach and her artistic practice. I'm both a scholar and an arts practitioner, so I wear a lot of different hats. I have a PhD in performance studies. I have a scholarly interest in music, not just understanding how music is made and making music myself, but also in the history of music, the culture of music, the business of music, and in terms of my own work musically, I've produced for artists like the late, great Sarah Dash of LaBelle, who just passed away recently last month. I have my own band. It's been a hiatus for a while I've been sharing a program, but I write songs for the band. I am an arranger for the band leader, producer, all of the above, and perform in the band as well. And that band is called Company Freak, and it's essentially a kind of return to the sound of old school soul and disco and funk music of the late 70s and early 80s, that kind of sophisticated downtown New York sound of artists like Nile Rodgers and Chic and D-Train, the kind of post-disco sound of D-Train, with actual members of some of those original bands as well, as younger artists. So it's funky, it's fun, it's a party, and you can check it out online. But I will say this, in terms of going back and thinking about where my interest in both making music and also thinking about music and writing about music came from, I mean, I have to start with my parents, because both of my parents are educators. My father was a professor of educational psychology. My mother was a school teacher. They both instilled in me very early on a love of reading and writing. The earliest musical memory that I have is sitting on my father's knee and listening to calypso. Both my parents are Trinidadian. I grew up in Canada, and I always will remember those rhythms, even though I don't make calypso music. The music I make is rhythmically driven, and so it comes from that. I also grew up at the kind of end of the disco era, or beginning of the kind of 80s pop Michael Jackson moment. And so I heard everything that my parents had in their record collection, their vinyl collection. I would go in and like listen to all of that stuff. But we also had a K-Tel disco collection, a cassette tape. and it had Barry Manilow, Copacabana on there. It had ABBA, it had Sylvester, it had Hot Chocolate, it had all these bands. And my brother and I, we would just play that over and over again. And I think the music that I make now is in some ways my attempt to try to recreate that. And I think a lot of times when musicians are making work, what they're trying to do is capture a feeling or an emotional precinct that they once, that made them feel empowered or liberated or whatever it may be. And you're constantly working through that in some ways. I also want to say that my own musical influences are really, really varied. Everything from all the disco stuff I was just mentioning to musical theater. I had early classical training in piano. I grew up watching American Bandstand and Soul Train and Solid Gold, breaking movies. I listened to, Cole Porter and Gershwin and the Pointer Sisters and Duran Duran and Eddie Grant. I mean, it was just like everything you could possibly listen to. And so a lot of that shows up in the work that I do. And I think oftentimes musicians are an amalgam of the various influences that have, that they heard early on and that have gone into the work that they do. But I also had very specific mentors. And I just want to mention a couple of them.
Yeah.
As a kid, I was involved in roller skating. I would compete professionally, like when that was the super popular thing to do. It seems maybe like, passe now, but Helen Richards was my roller skating instructor. And I mention her because she is somebody who helped shape my sense of artistic sensibility. Like what I do as an artist, even though it's not related to roller skating, it's still all of those lessons about how to hold yourself, how to compose yourself, all of those sorts of things have gone into the way that I still conduct myself today. I also had an English teacher in high school named Miss Tuba, who was such a hard ass. She was so difficult. If you thought you could write, you definitely did not think you could write when you took classes with Miss Tuba. But what she did was she sort of dressed you down and she gave you this really intense critique so that she could sort of build you back up so that you could understand the mechanics of how to write. And I think you need that. You don't just become a writer overnight if you want to be a good writer. You have to really work on it. And the idea of the craft and the discipline that's required to be a good writer, you need mentorship. You need somebody who's going to stop you and say, this word, not that word, or try this phrase, not that, or somebody who's going to expose you to, novels and poetry and so on that you might otherwise not have come across. And for me, Ms. Tuba was that person who made me realize that I could actually write and I could actually do this as a profession. And then there were other figures too, and I don't want to go into all that history, but I was a huge fan of Abbie Lincoln, the great jazz artist and social activist and so on. And I came to New York and I actually got to meet her in the first month that I was here. And for me, that was a huge inspiration, right? Just being able to meet somebody that you are a fan of, but then also to be able to get to know that person personally and really understand who that person is as a human being. Like I've never been somebody who's a super fan of anybody because I realize that all artists are human beings ultimately, and they're working on themselves and everybody is a work in progress. So all of this to say, if in terms of, helping people understand how to get from point A to point B to point C, I really think you need mentorship. I think you need people around you to help provide you with a sense of direction and path, but you also really have to believe in yourself in many ways. And sometimes that comes from family or maybe not. Sometimes that comes from, fans, that you might have or audience that you might have developed just singing on the street or wherever else. But you have to have that kind of input, I think, at some point to help you flower and help you grow.
So beautifully said, and it's interesting, and there's overlap there, and it really makes me think because actually, as you were walking us through that, you touched on all these different aspects and also kind of translated them through people, and I think that's also important for to say, right, how much it's about people, and like you said, sometimes it's the family, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's friends, sometimes it's a specific mentor, but it comes through people, and then it's all these layers, right? Like the rhythms, both of childhood, but also the rhythms of learning how to perform in the world in a lot of different senses, right? It's also that the person who, or people maybe who kind of stop you, check you a little bit, but also like hone craft, that side of it. And then also something, right, which is like heroes, not necessarily idolatry, but people that inspire you, that make you want to kind of reach and try and do more than you thought maybe was possible. And I feel like and that's the other thing, right, that it's not ever one thing. It's really a constellation of all of these things and all of these people that that guide us forward and pull us up. There's so much. It's almost hard to know where to begin, because both of you have these extraordinary careers of creative making that kind of pull in so many different aspects, and including sort of different mediums to a certain extent, right? I think very much of both of you is doing a kind of practice making that's kind of remixing, genres and kind of collaging all of these different, kind of worlds together into something, fresh and something new. And I wonder if I want to make sure we have a chance, Jamila, to hear some of your work. I always think that the time always gets away from me. But do you think maybe, because I wanted to ask both of you in the next kind of question to talk a little bit about how you think about how these different influences come into your work, and how you draw on different things, and sort of why and how that process kind of happens for you. But maybe it would help actually for our viewers also, and listeners, I should say, to get a chance to hear and see some of your work.
For sure. Yes, we can look at a little of the Black Girl Soldier video.
Great.
Cool to look back on that. It was like probably it was my first music video. So as Anne cues it up, I can just introduce it. It's from my first album, Heaven. Yes, and I'll talk about it more after we watch.
Okay, great.
Rosa was a freedom fighter and she taught us how to fight. Ella was a freedom fighter and she taught us how to fight. Audrey was a freedom fighter and she taught us how to fight. Angela was a freedom fighter and she taught us how to fight. So Jenna was a freedom fighter and she taught us how to fight. Asata was a freedom fighter and she taught us how to fight. Rosa was a freedom fighter and she taught us how to fight. Ella was a freedom fighter and she taught us how to fight. See, she's telepathic, call it black girl magic. Yeah, she scares the government.
Cool.
Y'all,
Yeah.
that was that was your first music video?
As my solo artist, yeah.
Oh,
I had a band before, but yeah, that was my first one. And I think I loved what Jason, what you were saying about mentorship. I think another thing about poetry is I met my mentors through poetry, and I feel like it's very natural, like, and maybe writing in general, like you were saying with your English teacher, but I don't find that so easily in music, like just mentors all around. And so I think I've definitely carried with me things that I've gotten from them. But one of my mentor friends is Krista Franklin, who's a poet and a collage artist. And the collage that you see in the video is her work, and kind of just with like the pictures of the like Asada and Audre Lorde and names that I'm saying. And I really feel like that video kind of encompasses how I kind of see community as a medium of art making as well. All of that song was inspired by Black women in my community who were organizing around a police violence that happened in the community that resulted in an off-duty cop killing a Black woman in a park. And it was a very just organic process that I wrote the song in. But then when I was making the video, I was like, I want this to feel like, like I was feeling when I was kind of thinking of all these women in my community. So there's like a choreographer who's like all of her children and like her dancers are in there. And it's just a very personal video to me. And the stuff I'm wearing is like, we just went into the beauty shop and we're like, we're going to put this on. So it was just a whole, very community-based process making it.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell, you can feel it in the spirit and in the style, and in a sense, this actually anticipates one of the other questions I was going to get. I mean, part of the idea of convening this is to talk a little bit about how we're thinking about politics in art making in this moment. And, just as you were talking about even how you came to make the video itself, I feel like, I don't know how you, and either of you can answer this, but, I think oftentimes we seem to be always getting this kind of fairly flattened binary when you're an artist, when you're in the creative space, where on the one hand, there are people who, just kind of have a line of like, the one critique is that you're, not political enough, that you're not using to some extent, right, your voice, the potential reach that art can have to do a certain kind of community work, to do a certain kind of work against, dominant discourses, and then right, you also get hit with the flip side, right, which is always very close by, which is, some other people who will say that you're too political, and this is kind of held against the creative person and the art maker, that somehow by introducing or making explicit a kind of politics in your work, that must necessarily, to some extent, come at the expense of, come at a kind of cost to some kind of, I don't know, artistic, or aesthetic aspect. And, I think in a way, I'm just watching even just that video, extraordinary for a first video coming out already so fully formed, it seems. I see it sort of kind of breaking that kind of binary apart, and maybe in part through the community making aspect of it. Do you feel that way, Jamila?
I definitely feel like, that binary is a false one to me. I really like Toni Morrison talking about like all good art is political. Like, I'm not interested in art that's not in the world, So to me, that I don't really, sit down and say, oh, I'm going to make like a political song, but I try to create things that are authentic to what I'm thinking about and caring about and feeling about, and in hopes that, that resonates further and ripples out. But I think that I was thinking a lot about utility in my first album. Like, I grew up in going to church with my grandma, and just was like always noticing how the music would serve a purpose, like there's like an offering song, a benediction song, there's a song that watching people get happy, get free, and feel things through the music. And so I was very fascinated by that idea, and thinking about that a lot with Heaven and Black Girl Soldier. And I like, I sample that chant that Rosa was a freedom fighter, which I heard in one of the meetings that I went to that year. And so just feeling like I wanted it to feel useful. And I think that, that came from seeing people, being connected to people, caring and loving people, that I wanted something that was useful for them. So yeah, I do think that the community is a way to kind of blur that distinction, but also, I just also think it's like the other thing that I really struggled with Heaven was in like the press run, and the criticism of the album. Like, often the conversation was all around like, ooh, it's political, and it was no conversation about the craft. And I would notice like if a white artist did a song about I don't know, like something political, war or something, like people would still talk about, you know, the production or like the lyrics or things like that. And there would be like a deeper layers to the conversation. So I think I did start to get frustrated at a certain point that I felt like there was a flattening of, oh, it's political and that's just political because you're a Black girl, you know, like sort of thing. And so I think with my second album, I was really intentional about wanting to control more of what the press was going to be like and what the format was going to be, so I could tell the deeper layers that are very intentional, and not just have it be kind of a flattened conversation.
Yeah. Jason, how do you feel about this? I mean, you're in the space of both, well, on one hand, on the academic side, but also in the industry and also, in the world of criticism.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo what Jamila was saying. Like, I think if you're a thinking person and you are in the world and you are somebody who absorbs what is happening in the world and you resynthesize it in your music or your theater or your films that you make, whatever it may be, it's going to come out. Like, all art is based on people making it, right? So it's like, it's based on people's identities. And so even if you don't believe in politics, politics believes in you, and your work is going to circulate in a world of ideas and politics and so on. So to me, it's just kind of owning that. And not all art needs to be explicitly political, but all art does political work in the world in some way, shape, or form. And I think it's an artist's duty to some degree to push back against this notion that these are two different things. These are binaries that can never, come together. The idea of like art should either be, or not even that. Basically, the idea that all art should be escapist or entertainment, I think, is just like, just doesn't work. And there's a long history and tradition of art that has spoken truth to power, or that has spoken truth to establishment, politics, that has been so powerful. And for me personally, very, very moving. I was radicalized in the 80s by the example of anti-apartheid struggle, against South Africa in the 1980s. But for me, it wasn't just what was happening politically, it was also how the music was speaking, right, to the anti-apartheid struggles. And so for me, listening to the song Free Nelson Mandela by the Specials, that song completely changed my sense of who I was and what my priorities were. It educated me about what was happening in South Africa, the other side of the world, but definitely connected to what was going on in America. And then all of that political music of the 80s and 90s was really a way into politics for me, and being able to not only want to make music that would specifically refer to political themes or the lyrics should be political, but also being a writer, writing about politics and writing about the contemporary scene. I mean, I wrote about Jamila's first album, Heaven, for NPR for the top albums of the year. And I wanted to write on that album because to me, I saw Jamila's album as being connected to this longer history of, protest music and social music, and particularly Black social music, that for me has been such a godsend. And so I was seeing those connections, and I wanted to be able to write about it in that way, because it was incredibly important to me. So my own music, like, I have a song called Drones on the Last Company Freak album. And it's a song about the Obama administration's use of drone strikes. And part of that for me was reading Jeremy Scahill's work on, investigating the incredible rise of, drone strikes in the Middle East and South Asia by the Obama administration, which a lot of people don't even seem to still know about. And I said, I want to write a song like that, but I want the song to sound like old school Sly and the Family Stone, particularly the work that he was doing with his group Little Sister. And so the song sonically and musically reminds you of that early 70s moment of a kind of explicit politics and critique, but it's referring to a contemporary moment. And I felt like it was my duty as a human being to illuminate a topic and a subject that was meaningful to me, but I think also should be meaningful to a lot of other people as well. And I think that's the work that musicians can do, especially in the context of protest, is you can actually raise awareness around issues that otherwise people just wouldn't have a way into. They might not open that book to read, Jeremy Scahill's work on drones and drone strikes, but they might actually listen to a 3-minute song, and the song becomes the entry point to a deeper thinking about the issue.
Mm.
Yeah, that's, you know,
And can I just also say,
Yeah.
and that is, I think, an important lesson about Jamila's last album, Legacy, or most recent album, I should say, because I think so many people must have heard that and thought, wow, I have not listened to some of these artists or read some of these artists that you're mentioning, right? And that's going to be my entry point into a world of ideas, right? Through the music. The music itself is a world of ideas, but the music is also this portal into a whole series of other ideas. And I think that's what's so powerful about it.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Jason.
I love that. No, I love it because I feel the same way that, you know, that the music does offer, like you said, like portals, right? It gives you openings. And this is, you know, and this always one of the things I'm like, you know, people think about politics and art. Oftentimes, I feel like they think about it in terms of content, right? Like, is it like in there in some sense? Like, have you mentioned certain things or not mentioned certain things? Whereas I tend to think that, you know, I mean, that could be one way, but there are also other ways to think about, right, the political in art. And one of them, right, is also like what kinds of opportunities and richness, what kinds of like detours, right, in your knowledge space, in terms of the kinds of things you're exposed to, that a work of art can you know, can kind of activate, right, and kind of get you hooked, like you said, like, maybe I never would have, you know, gone and read, you know, a book on, you know, foreign policy in the Middle East and drone strikes, but on the other hand, encountering it in this kind of unlikely space, this unlikely moment, creates a kind of portal that allows me to grow, so that the art itself is political, partly just because of its potential, right? As opposed to something, so many things that we're asked to consume by capitalism, which don't offer any of that richness, which don't lead us towards further growth, but in some ways only are there to kind of take from us, right? And I think of that as one aspect. And then also, you know, Jamila, when I listen to your music, and I completely agree with Jason, on the one hand, I feel so strongly that long and magnificent legacy of Black protest music, especially of Black women, you know, Abby Lincoln, we mentioned already, Nina Simone, and so many others. I also think of, you know, the politics of joy, right? And of the way in which, you know, the creation of a certain kind of space that's so beautiful, and where the spirit of the community shines through, even in the moments that are not the moments that people might point to as, oh, there she's kind of indicating the political, right? But actually those interstitial moments for me are actually, I feel them as just as activating, because in a sense, I feel like they're asserting and they're giving space to, right, a kind of vision of the world, to a certain extent, at least as I would like it to be, you know what I mean? And for that kind of a spirit of kind of freedom and joy itself, it seems to me, carries a kind of politics already right there, right? And that it's not just in the question of, you know, people reducing you by saying like, oh, well, you're political because you know, make reference to certain political events, or you cite certain kind of you know, figures who are considered political.
Yes, for sure. I think it's also about like how a song can make you feel, or allow you to tap into, you know, in our capitalistic little boxes, how we kind of have to push those aside, kind of allow you to embody and feel those things. I think about this story our choir director used to tell us about, like MLK, when he was on his marches, used to want the choir to sing Precious Lord in the moments when he was tired. And we don't think of like, that's, you know, a protest song, but that was the song that allowed him to take a rest. And it's like the lyrics, I'm tired, I'm weak, I'm worn, I just need help. And like that is also a message of protest. It's just to say how you feel and say what you need in a moment. And that really struck me. And I think a lot of my songs are just me doing that with myself, saying, oh, I feel lonely, I feel sad, I feel like an alien, I feel these things. And that kind of can, like you said, make space to allow someone to connect into how they might be feeling, which I think is so important.
Yeah.
And I was also going to add, I mean, I think there's a couple of different types of protest music, right? There's protest music with a capital P. And when people think of protest music, they think of Bob Dylan and Nina Simone and Curtis Mayfield and Marvin Gaye and Stevie Wonder and so on. And that's like all the MVPs of protest music. And those are the artists who have, courageously deployed their music and lyrics to speak to truth to establishment power, or they've explored social problems, so hypocrisy or injustice or oppression, et cetera, through their music, tyranny, corruption. Curtis Mayfield, that's who I think of. But there's also this like lower P politics or protest music that might be, like Jamila was saying, like a feeling. It might be implicit, it might be abstract, it might be impressionistic, it might be inspirational. So I once interviewed the great Philly soul producers and entrepreneurs, Gamble and Huff. And they've written so many amazing songs. And, one of their productions was Love Train for the OJs. And Love Train is one of those songs, people all over the world, grab hands, get on board the Love Train. And it mentions all the countries all over the world. It sounds so kind of naive now that we could all just join a big conga line, right? And like change the world. But in interviewing them, and I did this like around, I think it was just right after Obama had been elected. And they were saying that song for them, like it was prophecy, because we don't even live in that world right now where people are joining hands in that way, right? So a song that people kind of throw away and don't think of as being political because it's either anthemic or it's like danceable, whatever, that is a political song in many ways, because it dares to imagine a world in which we do not yet live. It's a kind of science fiction, right? And people don't even think of it that way necessarily. Or I'm Every Woman, Shaka Khan, like that's going to be like a timeless, feminist freedom anthem that was written by Ashford and Simpson, who came out of their own, particular world. And so I just think we need to be very expansive and inclusive in terms of how we think about what protest music is. I think all Black music is protest music in some ways, because it's the soundtrack of Black experience. And we were not even supposed to be here or to live, and we're still treated as being disposable, or like we're, constantly facing our own extinction and invisibility. And so the utterance of, Black joy, Black pain, Black anger, whatever it may be, all of it is a kind of protest, a kind of will to be, will to exist, I think is so powerful in whatever form that it takes.
That's beautifully said. There, you mentioned Love Train, and one of the things that I'm thinking about is that, Ralph Ellison has this famous essay where, which is entitled, "What Would America Be Without Black People?" And we all know it would be a very hellish place indeed. But one of the things that, I think sometimes that I think of is, we know that to a certain extent, the art making that we do in whatever form, but especially the music, has been in some ways, you go all the way back, I've just been writing about Du Bois and thinking, of course, about the sorrow songs and the spirituals. And Jamila, you've already been talking about the presence of music in the Black church. And music has always had this extraordinarily important place in helping people get through, whether that's getting through the day, whether it's getting through a decade, whether it's getting through a presidency, whether it's getting through a terrible crisis in one's personal life, getting through enormous pain, and pain and forms of oppression that have a way of seemingly never quite ending. And I say this because I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I do feel that there's a great deal of despair in the world. I'm a professor, I teach, and I have, all of these wonderful students who come into the classroom and who I see around on campus, and they're on so many levels. They're eager, they're bright, they're intelligent, they want to do things. But I also hear in their voices and the way that they talk about things sometimes this deep sense of kind of fatigue, a sense of despair, a sense of kind of pessimism that nothing can, and I wonder if you also sort of feel that there's kind of a little bit of that, or some of that energy at large in the world now. And are there things that you see happening in the culture today, things that you can share with us? I mean, there's certainly both your work itself, but beyond that give you hope, that are sort of things that you're finding inspiring, or that you're finding inspiration in at the moment, whether it's for the next project or the things that you're working on right now, or even just more generally, more abstractly.
I think one of my compasses right now is definitely Trisha Hersey's work. She has a page called the Nap Ministry, and she's just very great at explaining all the reasons why rest is important, especially for Black people, and how rest is not just something you do in order to get energy so you can do the next thing, but just rest for rest's sake. And I think, to me, at least personally, when I notice I'm feeling fatigued or pessimistic, it's usually because of the way that I'm working and the way that I'm just kind of this cog, and just kind of going without having any space to process or sit. And so I think that that's something I'm working on now, and I'm really inspired by her work as well. And it just makes me think of, in another video that I did, we did these interviews of like high school students. And as early as high school, one of the students was just saying, like, we just have so much work. Like we go to school, and then when we come home, we have enough homework that's going to take up our whole evening, and then we go to school again. And so it's just kind of like embedded in the way that we are from a very young age. So I'm thinking about that just for my personal process, and wondering, hoping it can also come into my writing and music as well. But that's really inspiring me right now.
Glad you said that. It's so important. Control the clock. It really, I certainly agree. I feel the same way, that, when you feel like you're on that hamster wheel and it's just one thing to the next, it's no way to be in the world. And everything starts to get a little dead, a little dull. And it's, glad you mentioned that. Jason, what do you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, I always, think of the things that my ancestors went through, and then that gives me real pause and a sense of perspective. And it's not to diminish the present moment and the present threats, which are unique to, to the contemporary scene. But I do think of that as a way to give some context to the way that I feel, and to just remind myself that what I'm going through is probably less than what, my folks went through, because, people, the history is there, right? Right now the push is to not teach that history in schools, right? But that history is a reminder of why we need to be optimistic, right? And I think that's part of why people are trying to suppress it right now. I also think I continually go back to this title of a John Coltrane album that was re-released called Both Directions at Once. And it was actually, the title came from something that Wayne Shorter had said to John Coltrane about how his songs were composed, that they like start in the middle and they move outwards, and they're kind of moving in both directions at once. I think it's an interesting metaphor for where we are. I think in so many ways it's easy to feel like we're just going backwards, because there's so much that's retrograde in our culture. There's so much regressive anti-intellectualism. There's so much polarization and division at every level. And yet I think it's harder to see the ways in which we're moving forward, because there are lots of things that are happening on a daily basis, even in terms of public policy and so on, that are amazing, that are great. But we live in this really oppressive mediascape, right? Where you just turn on the news or even your social media, which has been designed, literally algorithmically designed to make you feel bad so that you keep coming back to it, right? So I think one of the things we have to do is hold on to the idea that we're also moving forward, but we're probably moving in both directions at once, which over time, it's progress, but it's quite slow, right? And so it's not as fast as you would think it would be. And when you're inside of it, that progress doesn't seem to be happening at all. But we are actually, I think, in some ways moving forward. And I think music is a brilliant metaphorical reminder of this notion of being in both directions at once. Because often for me, what's powerful about music and musicians is that musicians are going back into the past, either through digging or sampling or whatever it may be, in order to move forward. Like Jamila, that is one of the great things about your work, I think, is that you are excavating the past. You're digging it, as Amiri Baraka would say, to move forward and to present us with ways of being in the contemporary moment in the future and in the future as well. And so I just always try to hold on to that, right? Both directions at once, because it's way more nuanced than just saying, no, let's be optimistic and forget about everything that's happening right now. It's way more nuanced than just saying, let's be total pessimists. Although I do think Afro-pessimism in particular has a great critique of white supremacy and other kinds of forms of supremacy. But looking at things being, moving in both directions at once is a way to embrace complexity as a natural part of what it means to live in the world. Like, we have to embrace it, we have to understand it, and we have to work through it if we want to actually produce a better future.
I love that.
Yeah. And I also agree, and I feel in, Jamila, in your music and Jason, as you were just saying, it can be zig and zag, right? And but the sense of multiple temporalities crossing each other and creating a kind of ecstatic temporality that allows us to kind of get out of that hellscape of the social media space that we're otherwise, constantly being lured back into. That's a space that is partly made out of the past, but also, I think, right, is a kind of future, a kind of imagination of a present future tense, some kind of different tense that is being made, and it's being made right now, right? It's being made in this moment, and there's something really, really special about that. As always, I've gone over time. we were talking about managing the clock, and I'm bad at it.
we just started.
I know, right? We're just getting warmed up, but we should at least see. Are there any questions that we can take from folks? I'm opening the chat here to look and see. Do we have any Q&As from the audience? I apologize to the audience if I didn't allow you the chance. I know so many folks on here really would want to communicate with us and with you especially and ask questions. Since we only have a little bit of time left, and we talked a little bit about how art can be so generative and be a portal and send people off into different directions. I always like to do little thoughts, recommendations. If there's a book, a song, an album, a movie, a performance, anything at all that you can recommend an audience member go out and find, read, listen to, experience, what might it be? And I'll go first, as always. I'm also very much a cinephile. I love the movies, and a movie that was really transformational for me when I first saw it many years ago now is Charles Burnett's Killer of Sheep, which is a really beautiful film set in LA, but also has a really extraordinary soundtrack. Some beautiful Dinah Washington and Earth, Wind and Fire, and a really fascinating use of music in relationship to the image. So I thought I'd give a little shout out to Charles Burnett and Killer of Sheep. But do you guys have anything you can send off our audience members with?
Jesse, I was just going to say, part of the reason that movie couldn't be released for such a long time is because of the music, right? Because it was held up in copyright issues.
True.
So, it kind of goes to show that, there's that other side of the music too.
There
right?
is
The idea of music as intellectual property that stops us from accessing stuff. Yeah.
That's true.
Jamila, do you want to go first?
Oh, sure. Yes. I've been just starting to read this book. I really love Alexis Pauline Gumbs, and I've taken a lot of her classes, but she has a book called Undrowned: Black Feminist Lessons from Marine Animals, which kind of combines like my early childhood obsession with like all things animals and like my mind. So I'm really liking that book. I recommend it.
That's great. That's a great rec. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mine is from the past. I was going to say Roberta Flack's First Take, her album from 1969, which I think is just a slept on album that was really ahead of its time in a lot of ways, 2 years before Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, a protest album that also included Leonard Cohen covers and all kinds of other stuff. And, just kind of deserves its due. But I also want to mention this album that deserves its due and is rarely talked about in the context of Black protest, which is Eugene McDaniels, the great writer, worked with Roberta Flack, Compared to What, and so on. He has an album from 1971 that is really slept on called Headless Heroes of the Apocalypse. Headless Heroes of the Apocalypse. And it's a mixture of funk,
and me
jazz.
digging through the crates now. I have to go through my own.
You got to go deep in the crates for that one. But
Okay.
I think it's been sampled a lot by like Earl Sweatshirt, Q-Tip, all kinds of folks have sampled it. But lyrically, musically, sonically, that album has got to be one of the most impressive protest albums ever released. And it is like unflinching and hardcore in terms of its targets, right? It is going after genocide and white supremacy and all kinds of stuff in a way that very, very few musicians have ever done. And it's just one of those albums that I think stands the test of time. And I also think of it as a kind of Afrofuturism because it is calling forth a world that does not yet exist, a world that we should live in, a world that we don't yet live in. So it was released in 1971, but it could have been released yesterday and it would still be just as prescient and just as important.
Oh, awesome. I'm excited to listen to that.
Yeah. I'd love to know what you think of it, Jamila, when you listen. Yeah.
Calling forth a world that does not yet exist. I think it's a great note to end on. We're a little after 7:30, but I wish we could have applause and audience. There's an audience out there that I know is as grateful as I am for having both of you, Jason and Jamila, join me. I feel very, very blessed to have had the opportunity to have this conversation. And I also just want to say, without just kind of being the fan here, that I'm just so excited by the work that you both have already done, and you still have so much career ahead of you guys. It's going to be so exciting to watch it blossom, to watch it grow, and we're very, very, very lucky to have you. And you both are part of what gives me hope, and I know gives a lot of the folks out there, the folks who are listening, who are watching to this, and many, many others besides, who give us a lot of hope and give us ways to feel and move and make our way through the world. And we have to be tremendously, tremendously grateful to you for that. So thank you so much for doing this evening. This has been really great.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Jamila.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, guys.
I just want to say thank you to all of you for what feels like letting us eavesdrop on this incredible, nourishing conversation that you just had, which was about how to think about music in ways that kind of blew my mind, but it was also about how to think about history and how to think about human nature and humankind and so many things. It was an amazing conversation, and I am so grateful also to all of you for creating it for us. I want to let everyone know we have recorded this. It will go on YouTube, on the Center for Brooklyn History's YouTube page tomorrow. And I really hope that this inspires those of you who are listening to come to the December program, the last of this series of conversations that Jesse is leading. This one focuses on written word. Morgan Jerkins and Joshua Bennett, writers, poet, will be his guests. So sign up for the 370J Project's great emails, visit us more, and heartfelt thanks to you all, truly, for just a powerful, powerful discussion, and for your work, of course. On that note, good night all. Good night to everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night,
Thanks
everybody.
again.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Marcia.
Thanks,
Good night,
Jason.
everyone. Bye.
Good night.